When we think about the fall of Rome, we usually imagine the legendary sack of the city in 410 by the Visigoths, followed by the deposition of Romulus Augustulus and the end of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. This narrative is appealingly neat, if also completely false. It turns out that the fall of Rome is actually more like the fall of Constantinople in 1453, because when Rome fell, another Rome was just getting started. And over the next millennium, this new Rome would go on to become the most powerful, wealthy, and influential state in all of medieval Europe. And yet almost nobody has ever heard of it. They call this place Byzantium, after the name of the narrow strait that runs between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara, where the city is located. For convenience, I'm going to refer to Byzantium as Rome's ghost, since it kept the traditions of the Roman Empire alive for 1,000 more years than the West ever did. In the year 330, the Roman Emperor Constantine came to the conclusion that his capital city was not the city it could be. Rome was not well suited to be the center of an empire that was increasingly based in the East. So he founded a new capital in the city of Byzantium, establishing it as the seat of imperial power and renaming it Constantinople after himself. Constantine recognized that whoever controlled this place controlled the Eastern Mediterranean. That's why every great power since then, from the Arabs to the Crusaders to the Ottomans and finally the Russians, fought tooth and nail to take it. Constantine's new Rome was a city of staggering natural wealth, protected by formidable natural barriers and ideally situated at the crossroads of 3 continents. With deep harbors, flat open spaces, and plenty of fresh water from nearby lakes and rivers, it was easy to defend and easy to expand from. But what made it so valuable was that it sat right at the nexus of 3 seas, making it the easiest port for traversing the Mediterranean, Black and Red Seas. Because of its location, it had been inhabited by Greeks, Romans, Persians, and many others before Constantine. But now it became the new heart and soul of the Roman Empire. Byzantium was by no means the first nor the last new Rome. The idea of a new Rome was a stock feature of imperial self-presentation in antiquity. But what makes the case of Constantinople unique is the extent to which it really was Rome in all but name. When Constantine founded his new capital, he transferred much of the government bureaucracy and personnel from Rome, bringing Roman customs, laws, traditions, and titles with him. He built a new Senate, complete with marble statues of prominent Roman senators, even though there was no real tradition of representative government in the East. In fact, Constantine's vision was to make his new Rome the administrative center of a revitalized Roman world. He reorganized the empire into prefectures, dioceses, and provinces, instituting a new system of provincial governors, counts, that were tasked with collecting taxes and administering justice. By the time of Constantine's death, the Eastern Empire had outpaced the Western in population, wealth, stability, and military power. The Gothic invasions and civil wars that plagued the West never really disrupted the peace of the East. Even when Rome fell in 476, the Eastern Emperor saw it as just one city among many in his vast domain, nothing more than a provincial backwater. But for the next 2 centuries, the ghosts of Rome would walk across the Tiber and conquer Italy. This is Justinian, the emperor whose reconquest of Italy, North Africa, and Spain brought the empire closer to its old territorial extent. He was the greatest general that Rome would ever have, until perhaps Napoleon. But despite his military genius, he couldn't stop the long process of decline that had been slowly grinding away at the Roman husk since the 3rd century. Justinian may not have known it, but his reconquests would turn out to be the last hurrah of Rome. A century later, the Slavs had invaded and settled in the Balkans, pushing the borders of the empire back to the edge of the Anatolian Peninsula. All that remained of the Western Roman Empire was a few enclaves in southern Italy, which would fall to the Arabs in the mid-8th century. So what happened? How did the Eastern Romans survive for another 1,000 years, while their cousins in the West couldn't even manage a single one? To answer this question, we need to look at the economic, social, cultural, and geographic realities of the two halves of the empire. There are some who would say that the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, did not inherit the full weight of Roman civilization because Rome was already in the process of falling apart when the empire split. If that's true, then it would seem that Rome's ghost doesn't deserve the title of Rome at all. But if we look closely at what was happening in the years leading up to the division of the empire, we find exactly the opposite. For all of Rome's problems, there was still enough good stuff left in the hopper to make the eastern half a genuine inheritor of classical Rome. Let's start with the economy. Despite the financial troubles of the late 3rd century, thanks to Diocletian's price controls, inflation was under control by the time of Constantine, and the recovery was swift. In fact, the economy of the early Constantinian period was probably the most prosperous in the history of the empire. While trade was still recovering in the West, the East had returned to the tax revenue levels of the 1st century. Trade flourished and was growing more diverse. Wealthy merchants formed associations that dominated different branches of commerce and shipping. Manufacturing and mining were growing more productive and more varied. The eastern provinces were brimming with a wide variety of goods, and in fact, it was in the East where we find the famous story of the man who went to Rome to buy figs because he'd heard they were so plentiful. But when he got there, he found that they were so expensive he had to return home empty-handed. The flourishing economy of the East is visible in everyday life. The pace of urbanization slowed down in the West, but the East kept building cities. Cities like Antioch, Beirut, Constantinople, Thessalonica, and others attracted immigrants from across the Mediterranean and the Near East. And this cosmopolitan character of Byzantine cities is especially apparent when we look at religion. At the time of Constantine, Christianity was only one religion among many in the Roman Empire. Pagans, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and others all lived side by side, sometimes harmoniously and sometimes not. But nowhere was this more visible and more important than in Constantinople, which was probably the most religiously diverse city in the entire ancient world. This mixture of people created a unique urban culture and contributed to the city's dynamism and wealth. Finally, let's consider art and literature. While the high culture of the late Roman West was largely confined to building bigger and fancier tombs, the art and literature of the East was quintessentially Roman. Roman law was codified and streamlined. Roman historiography reached new heights with the works of Eunapius and Olympiodorus. Roman philosophy experienced a revival, and Roman poetry blossomed like never before with the work of Ananias of Dara. The richness of this classical heritage gives us a window into how much the Byzantines felt themselves to be the inheritors of the Roman past. To say that the Byzantine Empire wasn't Rome, because the Western Roman Empire was already on its way out by the time the two split, is to miss the point entirely. The Byzantines thought of themselves as Romans, and they were Romans through and through. They just happened to live in the East. But what was life like for Rome's ghost? What was it like to be a Byzantine? Join me next time to find out.